The red dunes of the Namib Desert glowed under the first light of a bruised purple sky. In her quiet home on the outskirts of Windhoek, Elena woke to the familiar, rhythmic sound of sweeping. Her maid, Selma, was always there before the sun, moving with a grace that seemed to defy the friction of the floor. Selma had been with her for 3 years, a silent shadow who kept the house smelling of wild sage and fresh rain. She never ate in front of Elena, never complained of the searing heat, and never seemed to tire. Elena stepped into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The air felt unnaturally cool, a sharp contrast to the dry African morning. Selma was standing by the window, her back turned, watching the horizon where the sand met the sky. She wasn't moving. She was perfectly still, like a statue carved from the dark basalt of the Kunene region. "Selma, the coffee isn't started yet," Elena asked softly, her voice cracking slightly. Selma didn't jump. She didn't turn around with a startled smile as she usually did. Instead, she spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding stones, deep and resonant. "The stars are fading, Elena. They are calling the long way home today." Elena frowned, stepping closer. "What are you talking about? Are you feeling all right?" As she reached out to touch Selma's shoulder, she noticed something impossible. The sunlight hitting Selma's neck wasn't reflecting, it was being absorbed. Elena's fingers brushed the fabric of Selma's uniform, but beneath the cotton, there was no warmth. It felt like touching a polished river stone that had been left in a cellar. Selma finally turned, and Elena gasped, stumbling back against the wooden kitchen table. A thin, jagged crack had formed along Selma's jawline. It wasn't a wound. There was no blood, no raw flesh. Inside the dark fissure, Elena saw a soft, pulsing blue light, rhythmic and steady as a heartbeat. It hummed, a low-frequency vibration that made the silverware on the table rattle. Selma's eyes, usually a deep, soulful brown, were now swirling pools of liquid mercury. "You are breaking," Elena whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Selma, what happened to you? We need to go to the hospital." The maid shook her head slowly, the movement causing a faint metallic chime to echo through the room. "No doctor in this land can mend a vessel forged in the forge of the Great Silence. My casing is reaching its limit, Elena. The Namibian sun is a harsh catalyst for a soul made of light and glass." Elena stared, her mind racing to find a logical explanation. A costume? A prank? But the blue glow was real, illuminating the kitchen tiles. The woman who had folded her laundry and tucked her into bed during bouts of flu was literally coming apart at the seams. "Who are you?" Elena demanded, her voice trembling. "Or rather, what are you?" Selma, or the entity inhabiting the shape of Selma, sat down in the chair she usually avoided. She moved with a strange fluidity, her joints clicking softly. "I am a guardian of the sands. My people have walked the skeleton coast since before the first dunes were formed. We are weavers of the atmosphere, meant to ensure the balance between the desert and the sea." Elena sank into the chair opposite her. "But you've been cleaning my house. You've been scrubbing my floors for 3 years. Why?" The mercury in Selma's eyes stilled. "Your grandmother saved a fallen star in the year of the great drought. She found one of my kin buried under a fallen acacia tree, cracked and dying. She didn't fear him. She poured water into the sand to cool his core. That act created a debt. I was sent to ensure her lineage remained safe until the cycle closed." "My grandmother died 20 years ago," Elena said, her breath hitching. "The debt does not die with the flesh," Selma replied. She lifted her hand, and Elena saw the skin on her palm beginning to peel away like old parchment, revealing a complex lattice of crystalline structures. But my time in this skin is finished. The dawn has brought the end of my vigil. I must return to the deep sands." The humming in the kitchen grew louder, a melodic drone that sounded like the wind whistling through the hollows of the Spitzkop Mountains. Alina realized that the house felt different, vibrant, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Selma stood up, her movements becoming more labored as more cracks appeared across her face and arms. "I don't want you to go," Alina said, surprised by the sudden lump in her throat. "You're my friend. You're the only one who stayed after the others left." "I am not a friend in the way you understand," Selma said, though her voice held a hint of something resembling tenderness. "I am a function of the earth, but I have grown fond of the way you whistle when you paint. I have enjoyed the scent of the tea you brew. These are things my kind does not possess." She walked toward the back door, leaving faint, glowing footprints on the linoleum. Alina followed her out into the yard. The heat was already rising, shimmering off the red earth. Selma looked toward the horizon, where the massive dunes rose like sleeping giants. "Watch the desert tonight," Selma instructed. "When the moon is high over the Brandberg, you will see the signal. It means the balance is restored." Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through the yard, carrying the scent of salt from the distant Atlantic. Selma's form began to blur, her silhouette shimmering like a desert mirage. As the wind intensified, the physical shell of Selma began to disintegrate. It didn't crumble into dust, it shattered into thousands of tiny, translucent scales. Elena shielded her eyes as the kitchen uniform fell to the ground, empty and limp. Standing where the maid had been was a tall, slender figure made entirely of shifting light and iridescent glass. The creature was beautiful and terrifying. It had no face, only a smooth surface that reflected the vast Namibian sky. It stretched its long, crystalline limbs, and the sound was like 1,000 wind chimes caught in a storm. Elena stood frozen, watching the transformation. "Thank you, Elena of the Red Earth," the being vibrated. The sound didn't come from a mouth, it echoed directly inside Elena's mind. "The debt is paid. The house is yours, and the sands will always recognize your scent." With a sudden, violent burst of speed, the creature lunged toward the open desert. It didn't run, it glided, its body refracting the sunlight into 1,000 miniature rainbows. Elena ran to the edge of her property, watching the trail of blue sparks it left behind. In seconds, the figure reached the base of a massive dune and simply sank into it, like water disappearing into parched soil. The desert swallowed it whole, leaving the landscape as silent and still as it had been for 1,000 years. Elena stood alone in the heat, clutching a stray button from Selma's uniform. Returning inside, the silence of the house was deafening. Elena walked through the rooms, noticing things she had ignored for years. The air was no longer unnaturally cool. The midday heat was starting to seep through the brickwork. The scent of wild sage was fading, replaced by the mundane smell of dust and old wood. She picked up the uniform from the yard. It felt ordinary, just a cheap piece of fabric. There was no trace of the celestial being that had inhabited it. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Selma had stood. Her mind struggled to reconcile the image of a woman folding towels with the radiant glass entity she had just witnessed. She looked at the clock. It was only 8 in the morning. Her neighbors were likely just starting their coffee, unaware that a cosmic debt had been settled next door. Elena felt a strange sense of loss, but also a profound clarity. The world was much larger and more mysterious than her small life in Windhoek. She spent the afternoon wandering the house, touching the walls. She found a small, glowing crystal tucked into the corner of the pantry, a parting gift, perhaps, or a lingering piece of the guardian. When she touched it, a wave of calm washed over her. She knew she would never be truly alone in this house. The desert was watching over her now. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat on her porch, wrapped in a thin shawl, staring out at the darkened expanse of the Namib. The stars were brilliant, far from the city lights, appearing like spilled diamonds on a velvet cloth. She remembered Selma's words about the signal over the Brandberg. As the moon climbed to its zenith, the horizon began to pulse. It wasn't lightning, it was a rhythmic, golden glow emanating from beneath the sand. It moved like a subterranean wave traveling along the ridge of the dunes. Elena stood up, her breath catching in her throat. From the peak of the furthest dune, a pillar of blue light shot straight into the sky. It lasted only a second, piercing the atmosphere before dissolving into a shower of falling sparks. In that moment, Elena felt a vibration beneath her feet, a deep, resonant thrum that felt like a giant purring. The desert was communicating. She realized then that the maid hadn't just been a servant, she had been a bridge. The quiet chores, the silent presence, the way the garden thrived despite the drought, it was all part of a larger harmony. The blue light faded, leaving the desert in its natural, silver-lit state. Elena sat back down, a smile touching her lips. She realized that the Selma she knew was gone, but the essence of that protection remained. She wasn't just a homeowner, she was a guest of the sands. The next morning, Elena woke up late. For the first time in years, there was no sound of sweeping. The house was quiet and felt slightly heavier. She went to the kitchen and made her own coffee, the steam rising in the still air. She found herself looking at the cracks in the floorboards, half expecting to see blue light peeking through. She walked out to the garden. Normally, her succulents and desert roses would be struggling in the December heat, but they were vibrant and turgid with water. She looked at the soil and saw that it was damp, though it hadn't rained in months. "Still looking out for me," she whispered to the wind. She spent the day cleaning, but it felt different. It wasn't a chore, it was a ritual. As she swept the porch, she felt a strange connection to the movements Selma used to make. She found herself moving with a new rhythm, a slower, more deliberate pace. By noon, a knock came at the gate. It was her neighbor, Mr. Mbeki, an elderly man who had lived in the area for decades. He looked at her garden with wide eyes. "Your plants, Elena," he said, shaking his head. "They shouldn't be this green. And where's that girl who helps you? I haven't seen her on the porch today." "She had to go home, Mr. Mbeki," Elena replied, leaning on her broom. Her family called her back to the deep country. A few days later, a man in a dusty khaki vest arrived at Elena's gate. He introduced himself as a geologist from the university, claiming his instruments had picked up strange seismic readings coming from her property. "It's the strangest thing," he said, holding a tablet showing erratic zigzag lines. "There was a localized vibration right here. Not a tremor, but a frequency. It almost looks like a musical note recorded in the earth." Elena invited him in, offering him a glass of cold water. She watched him walk around her yard with his sensors. He stopped near the spot where Selma had transformed. "The mineral content here is off the charts," he muttered, kneeling to examine the sand. "There are traces of silica that are purer than anything I've ever seen. It's almost like fused glass from a meteor strike, but there's no crater." Elena remained silent, sipping her tea. She knew he wouldn't find what he was looking for. The guardian wasn't a rock or a physical anomaly that could be measured by a machine. It was a fragment of the planet's consciousness. "Is there a problem?" she asked innocently. The geologist sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. "No problem, just a mystery. This part of Namibia is full of them. People say the dunes move on their own at night. I used to think it was just the wind. Now I'm not so sure." He left her with his card, looking frustrated and intrigued. Weeks passed, and the memory of that morning began to feel like a vivid dream. If it weren't for the empty uniform tucked away in a trunk and the glowing crystal in the pantry, Elena might have doubted her own sanity. But the house continued to behave strangely. The temperature inside remained a constant, comfortable degree, regardless of the blistering Namibian sun. The water in her taps was always sweet and cold, and sometimes, when the wind blew from the east, she could hear a faint metallic chime echoing through the hallways. She began to spend more time in the desert. She would drive her old Jeep out into the dunes, sitting for hours as the sun dipped below the horizon. She felt a kinship with the landscape that she had never felt before. She understood now that the desert wasn't just a wasteland. It was a living, breathing entity with its own guardians and its own ancient laws. One evening, she found a small pile of blue glass pebbles on her doorstep. They were perfectly round and glowed with a faint internal light. She picked one up and felt a surge of energy, a brief flash of a memory that wasn't hers, a memory of the earth cooling after its creation. She realized then that the debt wasn't just paid, a friendship had been forged. The guardian was still there, in the shifts of the sand and the pulse of the light. A massive sandstorm began to brew on the horizon, a wall of red dust reaching up to the clouds. In Namibia, these storms could be devastating, stripping paint from cars and burying fences in minutes. Elena's neighbors scrambled to board up their windows and bring their livestock inside. Elena stood on her porch, watching the sky turn a violent shade of orange. She felt no fear. As the first gusts hit the house, the wind seemed to split around her property. It was as if an invisible dome had been lowered over her garden. Inside the storm, she saw shapes, translucent, shimmering figures moving within the dust. They weren't fighting the wind, they were riding it. She saw the familiar flash of mercury eyes and the shimmer of crystalline limbs. There were dozens of them, a silent army of guardians moving through the tempest. One figure paused near her fence. It didn't have Selma's face, but it had the same presence. It raised a hand in a silent salute. Elena raised her hand in return. The storm roared all around her, but within the confines of her yard, not a single leaf on her desert roses stirred. She understood that she was under their protection. The maid was just one of many, a hidden layer of the world that most people chose not to see. As the storm passed, she felt a profound sense of peace. The world was safe. The morning after the storm, the air was scrubbed clean. The world looked new, the dunes reshaped into sharp, elegant curves. Elena walked out to the gate and saw her neighbors emerging, tired and covered in dust, shaking out rugs and clearing sand from their doorways. "You're lucky, Elena," Mr. Mbeki called out, leaning on his gate. "The storm missed your house entirely. I've never seen anything like it. It's like the wind just jumped over you." Elena smiled, a secret light in her eyes. "I suppose I have a good foundation," she replied. She went back inside and looked at the kitchen. It was time to start the day. She didn't need a maid anymore. She was capable and strong, but she still kept a place at the table set for a guest and a bowl of fresh water on the windowsill for the birds and the spirits of the sand. As she began to sweep the kitchen floor, the rhythm felt familiar. The rhythmic sound of the broom on the tile was a song of the Namib, of ancient debts, and of the hidden wonders that live right under our noses. She looked out the window one last time. In the distance, a single blue spark danced on the crest of a dune before vanishing into the sunlight. Elena breathed in the scent of wild sage and smiled. She knew the truth now, and the truth made the world beautiful.